Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on the Sultan and the Saint documentary film with Dr. Susan Douglas. My name is Daniel Tutt. I'm with Unity Productions. It's a real honor to have you spend your evening with us tonight. I want to open up and just share some thanks to the organizations and the funders that made this event possible. The first funder that is of utmost importance to the creation of the website is the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, who have funded very generously 2 grants, both to the production of the Sultan and the Saint, but also to this beautiful website, which Dr. Douglas is going to share with us tonight. We also have a long-standing, going back over a decade, of collaboration with Georgetown University, starting, I think, honestly, with our first film on the Prophet Muhammad back in 2002. Dr. Douglas took the lead on creating extensive curriculum for that film. And I think pretty much for every subsequent film, Susan has been a powerhouse curriculum creator. And these curriculums for our dozen plus PBS documentary films have reached tens of thousands of teachers and hopefully hundreds of thousands of students. So we're excited about the Sultan and the Saint, our latest documentary, docudrama, which was Emmy nominated and which aired in a national broadcast on PBS in 2017. I'll talk about the film in a moment, but Georgetown has multiple institutions that have made this curriculum possible. And the first one is the generous funding provided by the Title VI Department of Education grant, which has created a resource center for the study of the Middle East and North Africa at Georgetown, for which Susan is the education director. And so Susan's role is split between the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and the wonderful Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. Both of these centers have been huge collaborators of my organization, the maker of the Sultan and the Saint, which is Unity Productions Foundation. UPF, as we're known by, really has 3 mission areas. We're making these large, high-quality documentary films that are about various themes having to do with the Islamic experience, with the Muslim experience, both in history, but also in the contemporary world. And from that, we also launch educational opportunities for dialogue, for opportunities for citizens to build religious literacy on the faith of the 2nd largest religion in the world, the Islamic faith. So these are programs that I have the honor of running and managing. I also had the honor of being the research director for the Sultan and the Saint. So I was helped Alex Kronemer, the director, come up with how to tell this timeless tale of an encounter between arguably the 2nd most famous Christian of all time, St. Francis of Assisi, and a fairly unknown Muslim leader by the name of Al-Malik al-Kamil, who was the nephew of the great Salahuddin. So he's of Kurdish descent, but he was based in Cairo, and he's born into a family who was granting him a caliph role, the most dominant caliph in the Muslim empire at the time. And this is in the 12th century. It is an incredible event in the history of the Crusades, but it's also, and this is more dear to me personally as somebody that's very much engaged with interfaith work, arguably one of the most significant moments of Muslim-Christian exchange, of Muslim-Christian dialogue in the history of the 2 faiths' interplay and interactions. So, for example, Pope Francis, in his latest encyclical, which came out, I think, just a couple of months ago, which is on the idea of coexistence and the idea of borders, and it's on the idea of fraternity across cultures, across ethnicity, and across race. In the 3rd point of his encyclical, he draws inspiration for St. Francis's voyage and journey to meet with the Sultan. So that kind of prominence, and in fact, the whole encyclical in many ways, he notes as being inspired from St. Francis's encounter with Al-Malik during the Fifth Crusade. So that's actually part of the reason why we wanted to make this film. We felt as if the moment was right, not merely because the Pope happens to be very open-minded to engagement, but because we had a resurgence of violence in the Middle East and North Africa at the time of thinking about making this film. And we have a persistent issue of domestic and really global Islamophobia. The idea that Americans have around the Islamic faith, we know from polling, suggests that time and again, irrespective of who's in political power, Democrat or Republican, there tends to be a widely accepted view that the Islamic faith is a faith that accepts violence, right? So our founders come from a Muslim faith background, but they also are journalists. And so we bring a kind of secular objectivity to the topic, but we also have a connection to the community. So it's both heart and head combined. And so when telling this story, what we wanted to do is give it a kind of modern relevance that would include both a secular connection, but also a kind of faith-based connection. And so you'll see, for example, we brought an intellectual perspective from neuroscience. And one of the foremost neuroscientists that does peacemaking studies is one of my personal favorite commentator in the film, Emile Bruno. And he's going to be looking at the neuroscience of violence, sort of from a kind of both historical, but also from I guess you could say a biological / social psychological perspective. In addition to that perspective, we also honor the scholars on both the Islamic and Christian side who have much to say about the encounter. And you'll see their voices represented in the film. As Susan will mention, we also have had the chance to interview a number of very prominent Islamic and Christian scholars who did not make it in the film, but who are doing work in the contemporary world, which is furthering peacemaking between the two faith traditions, both in America, but also globally. So the idea of peace through the media happens to be our motto, our slogan, that's our mission at UPF. So it was very natural for us to choose this film to make. And I think many of the Franciscans who supported this film actually were very grateful for their financial, but also for their educational collaboration. We've done hundreds of dialogues with the Franciscan community. And through a grant from CAICID, which is the largest international interreligious peacemaking organization, we've been able to launch a domestic program that promotes evangelical and Muslim dialogue using this film. Because even though St. Francis is a Catholic, a lot of evangelicals very much resonate with his message of peacemaking and with his general aesthetic, right? He's a sort of unabashed Christian. And then as you'll see in the film, or rather we're not watching the film, sorry, but when you watch the film, if you haven't, and I hope all of you do, St. Francis is not presented as a modern Christian. He's presented as a medieval Christian, which means that, you know, he was on a mission to convert the other, right? And I think it's interesting for a lot of us that are not tied to a faith community we often neglect the fact that a lot of faith communities still very much have a mission of conversion, but that mission, and this is something that was evident to me in the evangelical Muslim dialogue work that I helped to lead, that mission does not contradict the possibility of building a friendship with somebody from another faith. So for example, and I'll close at this and turn it over to Susan, Robert Putnam in Bowling Alone, the great Harvard sociologist, has actually shown in his study of religious communities, called American Grace is the book, he has shown, and others have as well, that interreligious dialogue, the most transformative interreligious dialogues, come from communities that are deeply rooted in faith. I think that may be a slight misconception that a lot of us have, going back to this kind of stereotypes on fundamentalism, right? So that was a very refreshing thing to sort of witness the film unlock a relationship building potential amongst these two communities. So with that, I hope that you enjoy Susan's presentation. I'll be back later to answer any questions about the film and about the lessons as well, and also mention all of our other films, which are free of charge for educators. So Dr. Susan Douglas is the education director at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, in partnership, in unison with the Prince Al Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. And we're very happy to have Susan with us. And I'm happy to have just dropped off about 700 DVDs of our films at Susan's porch. And because she's working from home like many of us, and she's going to be mailing these DVDs out, or
Exactly.
hopefully you find somebody else to mail them, Susan, as gifts to teachers. So
Right. You can write to me, and if you have one, and see how we can arrange the postage or drop off. So thank you very much, Daniel. It's always a pleasure, and it's been just an honor to work with UPF and this exciting venture that they have embarked upon. So I'm going to share my screen now and begin with the a trailer for the film. This is the website. Okay. So this is what Daniel referred to before we go to the trailer. This is a quote that from Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, the encyclical, very recent. Where he quotes, "There is an episode in the life of Saint Francis that shows his openness of heart, which knew no bounds and transcended differences of origin, nationality, color, or religion. It was his visit to Sultan Malik al-Kamil in Egypt. That journey, undertaken at the time of the Crusades, demonstrated the breadth and grandeur of his love, which sought to embrace everyone. Francis went to meet the Sultan with the same attitude that he instilled in his disciples. Without renouncing their own identity, they were not to, quote, engage in arguments or disputes, but to be subject to every human creature for God's sake. Some 800, unquote, some 800 years ago, St. Francis urged that all forms of hostility or conflict be avoided, and that a humble and fraternal subjection be shown to those who did not share his faith." And so this is extremely contemporary, and you will see immediately why when we go to the website, which has an educational site and also a place where you can stream the film in full. We have short videos for deeper engagement with ideas in the film, discussion guides for the public. So this website is not just for the education for teachers, but also for the general public who would view this film. So we have the discussions guides and different features for information and lessons for both the public and educators for various community groups. And here you will also see, which you will receive at the end of it through Google folder, a downloadable curriculum of ready-to-use lessons. And as Daniel mentioned, we have keyed this film in a slightly different way than the usual website lessons that sort of stand with the film. But we've included and based the lessons around a series of short videos, which were outtakes from the film or extensions of the interviews that Daniel mentioned in his introduction, as well as a number of other features that we will go to just shortly. So let me begin with the website. This is the segment for teachers. You just click on education when you come to Sultan and the Saint film, and then you will get the information here. And I'm going to now stream the trailer for you. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to backtrack and do my screen share with sound. Always trying to remember these things. Okay.
It is the height of the Crusades. Muslims and Christians have been fighting one another in a war that has raged 120 years. As death and misery mount, St. Francis of Assisi and the Sultan of Egypt, Mohammed al-Kamil, nephew of the famous Salah ad-Din, defy their angry times and human nature itself to cross the bloody battle lines and meet in peace. But will it make a difference? How does anyone stop the violence in a seemingly endless conflict?
We are more than just our daily struggles. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. The Lord has made us for a greater purpose. To be instruments of His peace.
When Al-Kamil comes to the throne, he's in a rather precarious position.
These two were indeed seeking peace in the midst of war, so they were open to being transformed by the person who was allegedly their enemy.
Okay, so going back here to our video, you can see some of the scholars already there, and I want to show you now some of the features of the site. The first one is that we are making available to you the entire downloadable curriculum. This is the table of contents, 153 pages, because there was so much in the film, and the Crusades, of course,
Susan, you're not on the PowerPoint. You need to, I think, pull.
Okay.
Currently, it's only sharing the web.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure why. I was sharing my desktop, but I'll go back again. And sorry about that, people. Things happen. There's my desktop. That should show you now. Is that showing my PowerPoint
Perfect.
now?
Yes,
okay, great.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. So sorry about that. Let me back up then just a tiny bit and take you up here. So again, the website features are the place where you can do the videos, some short video lessons, biographies, art, matters around art, a whole section on against violent extremism, so interviews with scholars and peacemakers, and timeline and so on. So here is the table of contents for the 153 pages of content that we put together in the curriculum. They include biographies of historical figures that you will meet in the film, Jesus in Islam, video lesson, medieval humanism is a whole subject, and humanism in Islamic history. There's a tendency now in teaching history to go global with these things because they were not simply movements that were unique to Europe. The role of religion in conflict transformation is part of the work of Emile Bruneau, the neurological or social psychology work. And then there's sections on respect for religious minorities. Again, another segment, the social psychology of intergroup conflict, which we'll be actually previewing, a lesson on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and diplomacy, and a life of Francis of Assisi, a life of transformation, very extensive session on him. And then some of the influences of him on Christianity and the influences which he brought in to his movement from his influence from the Muslim, his visits in the Muslim world. And then so how has the story of St. Francis changed over time, how each generation after St. Francis encountered his message and expressed it in art and in various other forms, of literary forms and so on. And then who are the Franciscans today? and conscientious objections, a whole session on that, and historical perspectives on the Crusades, how do historians view the Crusades nowadays, and finally a section on what is holy war and what is jihad, which I will also preview for you briefly. So the first section I'll draw your attention to here is history help, the context of the film. This was the fifth crusade, which not everybody is keeping score, or keeping count rather, of the various crusades that went on, all the way from the very first to the time when it sort of petered out. So there are maps and timelines. I'm going to take you now to the website there. This is a timeline of major events of the Crusades, maps, and this section will really orient you to the various phases of the crusade and how they fit into history, and anchors also events that took place. This last one shows the crusade in Egypt, which was the fifth crusade, and all of the action takes place actually in the Middle East, in Egypt, as you know, as the core of that theater of the Crusades. And then you have also biographies of all of the major figures in the story. They're very short, but very necessary because there's quite a cast. And then we have a section which also is videos, new historical perspectives on the Crusades by a group of historians. So moving to the next section, we have the first of the two videos, the most innovative and really surprising when you see it element of the film that is so important for our time. The work of psychologist and neurologist Emile Bruneau on empathy and dehumanization. Students analyzed the language and text produced during the Crusades period to illustrate the use of in-group and out-group language used to stimulate dehumanization or empathy. Students analyzed speeches and poems from the period on framing the religious other. And I've done this with students before, and they really pick up on the language that provides, you know, the rhetoric of reward and you know, encouraging people to come along out of both religious and secular reasons. And what makes it possible for them to embed themselves in this conflict. There is a second video we probably won't have time to watch, but it is on the role of religion in intergroup conflict, in which religion is shown as having the potential both to stoke conflict and to mitigate conflict. And one of the things that one of the images that he uses is the image of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, the image of the elephant being the subconscious mind and the conscious mind being the rider trying to bring this under control. And how does that play into the issue of control? We found a wonderful website for students called Coping for Kids that talks about how they can learn to understand their own their workings of their own minds and their own impulses and try to bring them under constructive control. So here is the short clip, and I would invite you to watch it, and you'll see that underneath it is the lesson and discussion questions, but they also are found in the curriculum that you'll receive.
Oh, you need to share that particular screen. So
okay, it should have done it by itself because I'm on desktop share, but I don't know why it did not.
yeah, you might need to unshare and then share that specific one.
Okay, I had set it up so that it would do both because it's showing my desktop, but that's okay. I will make it do that and have to toggle back then. Okay, this is not what I wanted either. I'm not sure what's happening here. Sorry about that. That was my desktop. Let me go then into presentation mode instead and bring it up that way. The best laid plans of mice and men here. Okay. And
So
of course, I have to
Susan
stop
is,
sharing again because I have to share my
yeah,
my sound. Yes, it already is being shared. Okay.
So what Susan is sharing here is we created about 6 short videos that are thematic. based, and this is one of them on the theme of the social psychology of intergroup conflict. There it is. We can see it. It's great.
Okay, good. Yeah, it was actually on a different browser screen.
Yeah, just make it full screen and we're
I'm
good.
going to do that too. Yeah.
The Pope calls for a crusade to recapture Jerusalem after 5 centuries of Muslim rule. Most people who answer the Pope's call are not killers. Many are peasants who never fought before.
We know that from some developmental psychology that children have this tendency towards empathy towards others, that they have a tendency to behave altruistically towards others, that they have kind of the underpinnings of morality and justice, and all of these things help a society remain together. If you have all of these psychological tendencies that are preventing you from harming others, how do you motivate people to fight against other humans? One of the most common ways is through dehumanization. One of the organizing principles of human psychology is that we have a tendency to view others in terms of us and them rather than me and you. And this has consequences, that once you think of another group as a them, then a lot of psychological processes seem to come online. So we tend to dehumanize those others, and we tend to apply empathy less well to them than we do to us. And so once you have this distinction between us and them, it can drive things like conflict.
What you unleash then is a certain religious fervor. We are going to take our holy sites from these non-believers. Of course, non-believers are thrown into one category, which would include Jews.
The Crusade's first victims are not Muslims. They are the Jews of Europe.
If you can stoke the fervor for solidarity towards your own group, that might then get people to commit atrocities against any group they see as another group. Because once you have the group identity, that's what drives some of your psychology. If you feel very low empathy towards the outgroup, that might lower the barrier against harming outgroup members. But feeling a lot of empathy for your in-group might also drive you to commit violence against an outgroup. So if you have people who are fervently trying to defend their in-group, who feel so much about their identities, then that might get them to commit violence against anybody that they just define as an outgroup.
Okay, let me find my way back here to, am I sharing this screen now? Am I sharing the PowerPoint?
No, you're actually sharing the web page right now.
Okay, all right. This is remarkable because I do this every day, but somehow something has taken place that makes it different. So let me bring up my PowerPoint, which is here. Okay, and I'm still in presentation mode. So I think we actually have time to view the second one, which is his video on the role of religion in intergroup conflict. So I'm going to bring that up and hope very much that it shares. You'll tell me, Daniel, if it does.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Glad to know that. Just for time's sake, I'm not going to expand the whole screen.
It's not sharing, actually. You have to do the same thing you did last time.
Okay. Hold. Okay. This is, like I said, I queued all of this up before. Let me now go back to Zoom and share with sound and hope that it's this one.
Got it.
Yes, it is. Okay, except where's the video? There it is. Okay.
There's nothing special about the teachings of religion that's driving conflict. Evidence is starting to show that the psychological tendencies that drive conflict are the complex combination of processes in the brain. They're a bunch of kind of deep structures that are underneath, that are kind of central in the brain, oftentimes referred to as the reptilian brain. And we know that it responds really strongly to fear conditioning, fear learning. The brain's a complex structure, but there are some kind of overall organizing structural aspects to it. And the one that's most interesting and most relevant to intergroup conflict for me is that the analogy that's been used for the brain is it's like a rider sitting on top of an elephant. The idea is that the rider on the elephant is that conscious part of our brain that we're aware of, that we can introspect about. But the elephant represents that part of our brain that's unconscious, that we're not aware of, but that is still driving our behaviors. And this becomes really important because a lot of the processes that we're engaging in, a lot of the things that our brain is processing, if they're beyond our conscious awareness, we don't think that we're being affected by things that are actually affecting us. And of course, these are the processes that have been kind of stewed in place by evolution over many, many years, many millions of years. And so since we're unaware of them, they affect us and we're not really able to intervene. We're not able to check those aspects of our psychology that's driving our behavior. There are a number of ways in which you could get past this intergroup psychology driving aggression. One is to try to kind of gain control over it, to activate the neocortical structures and inhibit those subcortical tendencies that we have. So that's one approach. You could try to foster development of this idea of control and gain conscious awareness of these processes that are driving you towards aggression. Another approach is just to redefine who us and them are. And I think this is the approach that religion oftentimes is trying to take, that the teachings of religion are trying to get people to embrace a broader definition of who us is. There's some really interesting research from Jeremy Ginges, for example. And in that research, he thought that it makes sense that if religion is driving conflict, if people think that they're told by God to harm another group, that if you ask them to think through God's eyes, that should actually increase your aggressive tendencies towards the other group. If, on the other hand, the specific teachings of religion are actually inhibiting this tendency we have to fight against other groups, then you should see a decrease in their belief that they should harm the other group. And he found the latter. So ideally, that would apply, that you would think of every individual as part of your own group, and they would reap the benefits, the psychological benefits of that, the tendency towards pro-sociality, towards altruism and empathy and justice.
Okay, so coming back here, the lesson materials that we put together are involving students in becoming aware of this and also in looking at education. And this is what he mentioned about Jeremy Ginges' work, to look at stimulating empathy, looking at what is it that makes us human and what is it that joins us to other people. And so one of the things that did happen also in the Crusades was various acts of humanity that are recorded and have come down in history. And so looking at that and also looking at the need for peacemaking. And this is what we have also in another set of the materials that are found on the site. And so a very important set of materials for students to look at are the whole idea of holy war. You know, the Crusades pretty much gave birth to this idea of holy war between, you know, Islamdom and Christendom, and the misconceptions have persisted to the present day. It's become confused with jihad. And so we have presented materials which will challenge that idea and also bring it in a contemporary way to helping students to understand the concept of writings about legitimate warfare. What are the limits of self-defense? What are the limits of warfare when it does occur? And curiously enough, St. Augustine's writings have been the hallmark and bedrock of Christian thinking on legitimate warfare. So we have located a pretty reasonable summary that is quite readable on just war, and we've seen it echoed. We also have some contemporary documents that echo that, one of which was the writings of former President Jimmy Carter. And we also have a presentation from a very reputable research organization of Muslims writing a very standard definition of jihad on the limitations of warfare, and you know, this is to say the understandings of jihad as personal, a personal effort against sin, and then ultimately various stages of public activity, going around the hadith that says if you see something wrong, change it with your hand. If you can't do that, change it with your voice, with your speech, in other words, writing, and finally, you know, with your heart. And also part of that, of course, is the necessity for collective self-defense. And so students will explore the teachings of Islam on just war, its limits, and also the mandate of peacemaking that is part and parcel, that if the opponent lays down their arms, Muslims are compelled to make peace with them and take up negotiations. So there are two videos here. One of them is on the rise of the Franciscan movement and his peacekeeping movement. These are all very short videos like you've seen of 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. And then the teachings of Prophet Muhammad that would have been inculcated in Sultan al-Kamil at that time. So these are really interesting materials. And then we have a section of really interesting stuff on various exchanges that took place in the Crusades. It's often in history and literature classes confused as to when did the major transfers of knowledge and technology and so on take place between Islam and Europe leading up to the end of the medieval period and the Renaissance and so forth. And in fact, the Crusades were responsible for some, but the major translation effort, as we talked about in our webinar and in the materials on Cities of Light on Al-Andalus, there were major translation efforts. Those did not really take place in the Crusades period, maybe a few things, but what did take place there were artistic exchanges and influences. There, people stayed there for, you know, a long time and became exposed to the foods. This happens to be pasta, which is arose in multiple civilizations, but definitely made it across the Mediterranean in these many exchange periods. You can't imagine Italian food without pasta. It wasn't just Marco Polo who brought it, but it was already there earlier. And then there are various artistic works that were made for multiple uses and multiple audiences, actually expressly bringing out in its decoration the presence of both Jews, Muslims, and Christians during the Crusades period. This is a famous friar canteen, which has motifs in Arabic and motifs from both Islam and Christianity. Then you have artifacts like this one here, which is a Madonna whose robes that she's depicted in actually contain Arabic inscriptions. This was very typical fine clothing for elites in Egypt at the time. And they were also exported because they were very fine silk, very sheer fabrics. But in many, many paintings, it's been discovered in the early Renaissance, late medieval period, the Madonna is depicted with various symbols from Islam. She'll be standing perhaps on a prayer rug or on a throne that has a prayer rug draped on it, because these were highly prized luxury objects. The clothing would have been, was very often embedded, either the wrappings of the Christ child or also her veils had pseudo-Arabic inscriptions, because these were fabrics that were imported into and around the Mediterranean and were then later imitated. Also, the halo is said by some art historians to represent, in fact, fine Syrian inlaid metalwork. And so these things appear in the Madonna. These are all very surprising things. And I'm going to bring up for you now what the website has in addition to that. Here's a whole set of cross-cultural exchange. One of the scholars that you heard there is an expert on the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, and talks a lot about the Islamic art influences that were there, and is also an expert on the influence in the spiritual life of St. Francis of Assisi that came from his encounter there. Here he's represented in almost, what they call Islamicate robes. There are many motifs of geometric designs, these kind of 8-pointed stars. And the architecture, of course, from the Mediterranean, from the Islamic world, was just then entering Europe through the cathedrals and so on. So this is a really rich part of the site. I'll try to take you over to another part right now, which is, let me go to the home page here and go back to the education section. And you will see that there's another segment on military innovations. Of course, it's very standard, sort of easy to imagine how military innovations would have come through the Crusades, because as soon as you see your enemy with some kind of innovation, you either don't make it off the battlefield, or you come back to fight another day and try to adopt that technology. So even the castles that were then built in the post-Crusades period in Europe showed the influence of those castles that were developed in the region. One of the interesting things is that an early form of explosives in the form of gunpowder, these are grenades that were found in Cairo. Greek fire is another one. So there's a lot of kind of interesting things. This is from the Smithsonian. It's actually a sort of torpedo powered by gunpowder, and then, composite bows and things like that. So the site is really just full of all kinds of things that you can delve into. So I think, so we would like to offer you, those of you who have registered with your emails and would like to have a full downloadable version of the full curriculum, 153 pages of it as a PDF. And also a bonus, which is a teaching unit that is based on primary sources that was produced by the Council on Islamic Education and the National Center for History in the Schools, the Crusades from Medieval European and Muslim Perspectives. And this really is a good tool also for expanding upon the kind of thing I was talking about, of how the soldiers on either side of the Crusades actually came to admire one another. Their leaders came to admire one another. So there were earlier also, of course, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi and the famous King Richard, the Lionheart, were two examples of that Salah ad-Din had him treated by his personal physician, and so he went down also in European lore. So almost all of the materials in there are just dozens and dozens of literary works and primary sources, short excerpts from primary sources that your students can sink their teeth into. So we'd like to thank you for attending, and would like to entertain your questions now. And at the end, then Daniel will talk a little bit more about some of the other films that are upcoming.
Thank you, Susan. That was wonderful. Little flavor, a little taste of the material. Folks can, this is a webinar, it's not a Zoom where we're all together. We have a really good showing, so I think there might be too many people to do that form, but type your questions in the chat and Susan will be happy to answer them. We've had a couple just nice positive comments, but perhaps there's any technical questions about the website. The URL for the record is sultanandthesaintfilm.com. sultanandthesaintfilm.com if you're having a hard time finding it. I know that
It's
Jane,
actually sultanandthesaintfilm.com.
yeah, Sultan and the
Yeah,
Saint
yeah,
film.
okay, great. And I also would like to share, after apologizing for the glitches that happened, it happened that I was tuned into another browser, and it wasn't showing my desktop for some strange reason. So I don't know if I can bring this into the chat in some way. There is no chat, there's actually Q&A. If I can log on to that, I will also bring both of these Google links to you. I need to get out of presentation mode is what I need to do. Okay, so I can share those two links for where you can get the two teaching materials that I mentioned that you can download. Those are linked onto a Google Drive. So let me go in here and see if I'm able to put it in the Q&A. Would they be able to then see that, or you could transmit it to them in some way?
If you put it in the Q&A, they should be able to, everyone should be able to see it.
Okay, so I'm gonna I have to put open. Is that what I have to do?
Yeah, it should pop up for you quite easily.
Okay, it's not, okay, I'm not seeing all I can do is put an answer. It's not letting me ask questions.
I see.
So let me type an answer to you and then you can transmit it.
Let me try that, yeah.
Okay. So there you go. There's my answer, send, and that should give you both of the links.
Okay.
Zoom life is complex.
Well, we have a couple comments. One from Hussein Kamiji, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, that some of the topics are mentioned in Islam Empire of Faith, directed by Robert Gardner. And I think that is true, although I'm not sure that the encounter of St. Francis and Al-Malik al-Kamil is actually mentioned in that documentary. To my memory, it's not.
It's not, no. And I don't think that they delve very deeply into the Crusades either. It kind of just goes into this legacy of conflict and contact between the two. But this film really lays it out, and we've attempted to also give you a lot of historical background on the early Crusades, because this is, again, the fifth one, and it was actually one of the last, when the Crusades effort from the European side really petered out.
Yes. So another question from Catherine Faulkner is whether the curriculum has been used for adult and community learning forums. And the answer to that is somewhat, because we actually have a separate page on sultanandthesaintfilm.com, which I can share my screen and show it to you, where folks that are interested in community work, interfaith dialogue, that kind of thing, can go. Susan, can you see the screen there?
Yes, I can.
So at the top there, you see where it says Interfaith Encounters. That actually is a whole separate initiative that is centered on Muslim-Christian dialogue, okay? And you'll see there's various quotes from evangelical leaders and some other Catholic Christian leaders. Actually, Sister Kathy Warren is a scholar featured in the film. And here we have a whole other dialogue toolkit and interviews, for example, such as this interview with one of the leading Sunni Muslim clerics, a gentleman called Abdullah bin Baya, who is the person who launched this incredible charter for human rights in the Islamic world. And that charter is actually referenced on the website. So if you go there, and then we've created this thing called the Peacemaker Network. And these are, this is not necessarily for students, although students might find it interesting, but these are professional activists in the field of Muslim-Christian dialogue. And we sort of spotlight them and the way that they have used the film, right? So if you're interested in the kind of adult component, you're going to want to go to the Interfaith Encounters page, okay?
But with a shout out to Catherine Faulkner, I do want to say that a lot of times people come to this film and don't have a lot of historical background on the Crusades. And so a good sort of, if you have them viewing the film or before they do a sort of community outreach around the film, send them to the website, because we also designed that for public information. Even in the context of interfaith dialogue, it's really interesting to see the exchanges of artwork and the exchanges of influences in the buildings. For example, that remarkable Basilica of St. Francis, which was built very shortly after his death and shows a great deal of Islamic architectural and artistic influence.
Susan, we have a couple other questions.
Okay.
One is from Jerianne Basden. Pardon me if I mispronounce your name. I assume this curriculum is for high school students. Are any parts able to be used in classes for English speakers ESOL?
All of the materials are under Creative Commons licensing, and so for that reason, any piece of it that you want to use can be taken out and excerpted and quoted and modified, and with annotations for definitions and things like that. Like everything else we do, it's modular, so that you can, it doesn't require that you go through all of the lessons. It's a selection, it's a menu of lessons that you can use. And in particular, one of the most interesting parts was what I mentioned with the work of Emile Bruno. You'll see a reference in the lessons that accompany that segment to this website called Coping for Kids, using the letter 4. And this one discusses issues about bullying and othering and those kinds of things, and helps actually engage students in how they deal with it. And of course, students who are English language learners may very well have confronted those kinds of situations themselves. So it can be very, very productive.
Another question from Simone Arias, which is, since the California legislature is debating ethnic studies curriculum and courses, how might we encourage educational objectives often inhibited by political objectives in the current time?
The whole issue of how we deal with explaining difference, explaining diversity in the world really needs a historical component. We can't approach it simply as who's here and where did they come from. I think students need to understand some of this background. And besides that, in the air, the phenomenon of say Islamophobia, for example, in this case, is fascinating and is also not without background. It's been going on since way long before 9/11. And in fact, it goes back to the Middle Ages, when the kinds of things that were said of misperceptions about who Muslims are, what they believe, thinking they worship Muhammad or idols or something of that nature. So I think it's important to engage historical materials as well as looking into, you could say, ethnic studies. And these sorts of short videos, the film itself, are very good entrees to doing that. As for the politics of it, I think Emile Bruno answered that best in saying that his work and the work of Jeremy Ginges really point to overcoming this othering by cultivating knowledge, cultivating empathy and knowledge and understanding of the other, so that those lines between us and them become blurred and we see each other as human beings. And indeed, that is exactly what the encyclical of Pope Francis is appealing to, that I quoted from the beginning.
Very helpful, Susan. Thank you. Hussein Kimji says, not Francis of Assisi, you are quite right. I think that's a separate comment. Sabr Nuh says, I'm a convert to Islam, and I saw the Sultan and the Saint at an Islamic convention. And Sabr would like to share that it's a wonderful film. And what advice might we have for the best uses of the material to open up interfaith dialogue using the film?
I'm going to bounce that question back to you, Daniel, because you know both pieces of that.
Sure.
I have not engaged in anywhere near as much of that kind of dialogue as you have. And so,
Sure.
So tell us what you think.
Sure. So I think, first of all, the Abrahamic faiths both have something to gain from this film, or all three have something to gain, including the Jewish community. in the beginning of the film, we talk about how when the Crusades first started, its first victims were the Jewish community. So it's very much Christian Muslim, but I think we can keep the triad of the Abrahamic family engaged with the dialogue here. So that's point number one. Point number two is the theme of peacemaking has been a way to encourage Protestant and Catholic, as well as Muslim and all the variations of Islamic faith and identity and so on, to really rally behind that theme, right? Including the evangelical Christians. You may or may not know that a large segment of American evangelicals, including like the Anabaptist movement, for example, and the Mennonites, for example, place peacemaking at the center of their mission. So, and the Baptist community also has a tradition of peacemaking, right? And even if they don't place peacemaking in a central way, we've created a way of a kind of networking through Christian congregations and pastors to introduce the film, but we do so in a way where we train the pastor to give a few sermons to warm up the theme of peacemaking before it's introduced. Because one of the big things we learned when we created the short video, Jesus in Islam, was that a dialogue that forces similarity between Islam and Christianity around Jesus is not always the best approach, right? There is a certain impulse that a lot of Muslims have, that the similarity that Muslims, the reverence that Muslims have for Jesus will be an intuitive bridge builder. And I think in many cases for mainline Protestant, which are largely liberal Protestants, and many Catholics, that assumption is true. But when you go to evangelicals, it's not exactly true, okay? So you want to find a kind of different point for dialogue that's not around Christology, right? Because for a lot of very faithful Christians, sometimes that can be a turnoff. It's not to say you can't talk about it. It is to say that you need to build up to it, you see? So the film is a nice way to center peacemaking, right? And we actually have in the curriculum I shared with you on Interfaith Encounters, a series of very nice excerpts from the Bible and from the Quran and from the Hadith and other sources on the imperative of peacemaking. So that's what I would say about that. Okay, what else do we have? We're almost running out of time. And thank you all so much. Oh, wonderful, Jan. Hello, wonderful to see you, Jan. Thank you. Let me just quickly share my page again for you and show you our homepage, just so you know how to get there. So as educators or as activists, I'm sure we have a combination here. Here's our homepage. Now go to find the good stuff. Go to teachers, okay? And here you'll have the opportunity to download, or rather to access the streaming rights for free for all of our various films, from the Sultan and the Saint to our film on American Muslims, to our film on the Prophet Muhammad, to our film on a Muslim woman hero during World War II, to our film on Al-Andalus, to our film on the largest poll ever conducted of the Muslim world, to our film, this is actually very good for folks that teach elementary and middle. This is on Muslim holidays called Nadia's Ramadan. This is our film on the experience of the transatlantic slave trade and the Islamic faith. This is our film on Islamic art, our comedy show. This is our kind of bridge building interfaith one. This is a comedy as well. So all of those you can find at upf.tv/teachers. And then that PDF link right there will take you to a wonderful cheat page where every curriculum that Susan has ever created for us, every film, you see that? You just highlight and boom, you open the PDF by film. So it's all there, you see? So that's quickest way to get the curriculums, okay? And with that, yes, we have a pioneers network of individuals that fund our work. We have some foundations as well that allow us to give this to you free of charge. And we just ask that you evaluate and that you share your feedback with us, that you stay in touch with us. There it is. I think we're right at 1 minute past. Susan, do you have anything else you wish to mention before we say goodnight?
I just want to thank everybody and remind you that if that you'll be getting the link to download. I think we have your emails from your registration, and we'll be able to then send out that link to all of you to pick up the two resources on the Crusades and the whole curriculum from the website.
Yes, and the website for Unity Productions Foundation is upf.tv. That's U as in Unity, P as in Paul, F as in Frank, .tv. And then I'll just close by saying our latest film is an animated film, and we're trying to launch it as a commercial venture. It's going to be on the Syrian war and the refugee crisis of the contemporary Syrian conflict, combined with a fantasy. It's a fantasy program designed for young adults and adults that links the contemporary experience of the Syrian crisis with the poetry of Rumi, the great Muslim poet Rumi. That film is called Lamia's Poem. And so in the future, next year, we hope, that film will be made available as well.
So
all right.
Wish all of you well, and thank you very much. And we will be able to view this webinar, hopefully with a few choice edits on YouTube.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. And thank you all for being with us. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.